Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Marilyn and I love to read. How do you feel about book prize lists? Are you a fan? There's so many of them. And when I first started my channel, I didn't know most of them. Yeah, I knew the Pulitzer Prize for literature. Maybe that's one of the only ones I knew. But I didn't know the Booker Prize, the Lambda, the Women's Prize for Fiction, and many other lists, including the Booktube Prize. Well, when I first started my channel, I got on the bandwagon and started buying books that looked interesting on said lists. And I have to admit that the first year I really spent a lot of money, more money than I should have. And more likely than not, I was disappointed in the books that I was getting, that I was reading. And to make it even worse, I live in Hawaii, so a lot of the books that came to me brand new cost a lot of money, and the shipping was a lot of money, and yeah. And it made me really upset sometimes when I would hear such high praise, this won this prize or won that prize, and I really hated it, or even worse, couldn't get through it. So I ended up taking like hauls of books to try to sell some of them, or most of the time I gave it away. So I had to reevaluate my relationship with book lists. I remember one year, maybe it was 2 years ago, I bought 4 books on the Women's Prize list, and the only book that I really liked was The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. And another time I bought like 5 books, and there was another another book from the UK. I think it was called Careless, and I talked about that. It was about the care system in the UK. But in general, book lists have not been good to me or for me. So when I found a book list that was sort of a conglomeration of a lot of book lists, and I was able to pick from that, and I did a video, and I'll have it either up here or I'll have it up here and down in the description box, not only of the video that I made about this book list, prize list, best of 2024, the ultimate lithub prize list, but also the actual list, so you can pick your own books, not only from the ones that I picked from my video, if that makes any sense. Anyway, so I was going to come on and tell you that I've changed my mind about book lists because of that particular list, because I found 3 books on that list that were great, were wonderful, were 5-star reads. But then I started thinking about it, and I started changing my mind, because I realized that all of the books had something in them that weren't really 100% me, and maybe had a little bit of trickery. I don't know if good writing is trickery, but it seemed like the authors had to do so much to get us to get to that prize, and some of them did it wonderfully. Let me just tell you about the books. These books are 5-star reads for me, but they aren't perfect books. Now, I think that all of you realize that 5-star books for one, a 5-star book for one person might not be a 5-star read for another. So, and also, after I read the books and let it settle, we have to let a book settle for a while before we can talk about it. I realized that the reason I love these books had maybe nothing to do with the actual plot of the book, but it reached me or touched me in a different way. At least one of them did. So the first book I'm going to talk about, I read on Kindle. Yeah, I know we had a lot of discussion about Kindle, but I read it on Kindle, and I'll have it here. It's called The SafeKeep. And The SafeKeep is a prize-winning book. And not only is it a prize-winning book, it was nominated, and I think rightly so, for the Dylan Thomas Prize 2025. And it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And I am so happy that I didn't know anything about it when I went into it. I thought, and I was so happy that I didn't go deeper into watching reviews of this book. So I'm going to be very careful about how I tell you about the book, because I would not have enjoyed it as much if I knew as much as I did, if that makes any sense. So what is this book about without spoiling it? Well, it's about a house. And in the first few paragraphs, we read, "A house is a precious thing." And we meet Isabel. And I have to say, she's a very scary lady, maybe about 30 years old. And the blurb says that it is an exhilarating, twisted tale of desire, suspicion, and obsession between two women staying in the same house in the Dutch countryside during the summer of 1961. And I do have to mention also that I just read this recently, that the author Yael van der Wouden, or Wouden, is the first Dutch author, and she wrote this in English, so it's not translated, who was nominated for the Booker Prize. I think that's correct, and if it's not, I'll let you know in the comments. And that's all I knew about it, that it was two women who lived in the Dutch countryside around 1961, and a powerful exploration of the legacy of World War II. I actually didn't know that part when I went into the book, so I won't say more than that. Now, I loved this book so much, but it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. And I'll tell you why later. But if you know, and I know you do if you're on BookTube, Eric Carl Anderson has a blog called The Lonesome Reader. And I really suggest that you read that blog, because he's such a wonderful reviewer. I love his videos too, but he's a wonderful reviewer. And he brought out something in his review, and I'm without being a spoiler, that I'm going to say that, yeah, that's what I loved about this book. Of course, you can say that the Dylan Thomas part, it's full of poetry, beautiful prose poetry. That is amazing. But he says, "I found this very pleasurable and moving to read, as it's a story that has multiple levels." But the part that that resonated with me he said, "It's a creepy tale with almost gothic, Rebecca-esque undertones about the claustrophobia of being stuck in a house with someone you resent and feel a growing animosity towards." And I'm going to read you a few sentences of the book without being spoilers. But we are introduced to Isabel, like I said, who is very, I would say, more than OCD about her house and the things in her house. And she has two brothers. I think she has two brothers. But she lives alone right now because they're either working in other places, or one brother is gay and lives with his partner. So she's alone, and she's happy alone. Or is she? So this is a sentence from, I shouldn't say a sentence, it's more than, it's a portion. "She has made the kitchen a lovely place. She had made the kitchen a lovely place. Isabel could cry at it, at how a room could be made and left behind and turned terrible by way of absence, how a space could miss a person. So we see that that's really beautiful writing. But let's get back to the beginning of the book, where she finds out that her brother's girlfriend is going to have to stay with her for a period of time. And she's sort of bullied into it, because in this time, women didn't inherit houses. Her brother is the one who inherited it, and he's, he kind of tells her in a certain way, well, it is my house, without really saying that. So he says, you will be nice to her, and she says, I will be nothing to her. So we get the impression of how Isabel is, what kind of person she is. But she's more complicated than even that sentence would show you. She is scary. And I thought that this was going to be a thriller. And that's why I was so surprised at the way the book, the twists and turns. And there's a reveal. And I have to admit, without telling you too much, that I did know the reveal way early. It was pretty obvious, the reveal, if you're well read, maybe. But I didn't know the whole reveal. I just knew a little portion of it. And I said, ooh, that's really good. It's really good. So, now why wouldn't you love this book? It has a lot of sex in it, very graphic sex. And when I did go back to Goodreads and read other reviews about it, they thought that the sex part was too much, too graphic, and just went on and on and on. I didn't feel that way. I mean, there were a few sentences that I skipped over, like TMI maybe, but I thought it was done very, if graphically, maybe poetically. But if you don't like that, you might not like this book. Yeah, that you might not like this book. After I read it, loved it, gave it 5 stars, I read that the author, and let me just tell you her name again, Yael van der Wouden, was very much influenced by Sarah Waters. Now, I haven't read any of Sarah Waters' books, so if that means something to you, if that makes you either want to read it or not want to read it, I'll leave that for you. But I only heard about Sarah Waters on booktube, have not read any of her books. But I think that this author is, and this is a debut novel, did a wonderful job. I'm not a big historical fiction person. It has to be really good for me to really give it a 5 star. And yeah, so that's enough of what I'll say about the SafeKeep. Now, we couldn't go any further from one end to the other with the second book that I really loved. And that is, and I have a copy of this one, it's Margo's Got Money Troubles. Let me show you this book. You know, I'm not crazy about the cover, and I don't know why, but I think it's because I didn't picture in my mind Margo looking like this. Isn't that silly? I thought she was a brunette. Who cares, right? But it just didn't sit with me. I heard there's a great audiobook of this, by the way. Now, I shouldn't like this book. This book, on the surface of it, you wouldn't think that a 70-plus woman would like. Oh, but you would be wrong. So Margo. Okay, who is Margo? She's a 19-year-old young woman going to junior college, working as a waitress. She comes from a way dysfunctional family. Her mother is not a motherly type. Her father is an absent ex-wrestler who she barely knows, and she becomes pregnant by her having I have to say this, like an affair with her 37-year or 38-year-old professor. So she's like 19 years old. So is that really an affair, or is that like an abuse of power? And we're gonna go through this book. It touches on a lot of things that have feminist views. But now, why wouldn't I like it? Okay, or why mightn't I have liked it? So now she decides to keep the baby. And maybe, a lot of her roommates, they thought she was like, are you keeping your baby? Are you kidding? Her mother says this. Everyone says this to her. And this is part of the reason why this book spoke to me. Not because I was an unwed mother. No, but I was a very young mother. I got married at a young age. But I'll get back to that again. So, yeah, there are aspects of this book I didn't jive with. I'm not into wrestling, never was with the WWE. I don't know that much about OnlyFans. And yes, there are graphic parts of this book in a different way than the first book. So, yeah, there's a lot of sex in it, let's put it that way. Not graphic sex like the first book. And also, there's a lot of social media. The author breaks the fourth wall, but does it very elegantly and in a way that didn't bother me, like another book that I had talked about in another video that really annoyed me. But the way she broke the fourth wall was very natural, because the guy that got her pregnant was an English professor, and she was very good in his class. Well, out of class too, but that's another story. And he dumps her when she finds out she's pregnant, of course, and she really has no one to rely on. She feels very alone. But the way she breaks the fourth wall is she writes in first person when she's able to, emotionally. The character. I'm not talking about the author. Of course, the author. But when things are really, she'll tell you, well, I'm going to go into the third person now because it's too difficult for me to say this part out loud. And that worked for me. That really did work for me. So why did I love this book? Even though I really am not into the subjects that it talked about, I thought that Margo was a wonderful character. She was, a lot of people said it was laugh out funny. I didn't find it laugh out funny, but that could have been one of the reasons because I don't know that much about the things that she was into, like wrestling but the characters, they were amazing. They weren't all good, they weren't all bad. Different sides to them. They weren't all villains, and they weren't all good. And I like that in a story. Also, the way she tells a story was so good. But I did pick out, there was a part in the book that I really related to, why I found this book to be a 5-star read, despite. So she finds out, and I should read you this part first before the part that made me cry. A lot of people call this a feel-good story, and it is. It really is. But listen to this. I cut out the best of the ultrasound pictures and kept it on my bedside table. I would spend hours staring at it. It was such an inadequate, ugly image, so frustrating in its refusal to give me anything to hold on to, any way of envisioning who the baby would be. My body was making something in secret, and I was reduced to spying on my internal organs with these grainy black and white photos. But I hung on, faithful, waiting. So it almost seems like she had, at first, that she had the baby because everybody is telling her not to, and she's being, stubborn about it. But we find out there's a lot more to it than that. And something that I related to, when you have dysfunctional parents and you feel that maybe you can be a better parent, even if you're so young. And then when the baby did come, you find out how inadequate you really are, and especially when you have no one. And I was fortunate enough to have people around me. I was the same age when I had my first child. I was still 18. And she was I think she was about a year older than me. But I was married, and I had my mother, though very similar, in fact, to her mother, didn't want to really help me with teaching me how to mother, but was very quick to criticize me about my attempts. And this sentence made me really cry. She names her kid Bodhi, her son Bodhi, which in the hospital was laughed out by a nurse, but I won't go into that. And then Bodhi was born, and Margo was alone with him in her room, like she'd been locked in there and told to spin straw into gold. How did other women do this? I don't know. I had that feeling more than once. I have 4 children, and even when I was older, even 28, I should tell you TMI, when my marriage broke up and I was alone with my son, my 4th child, and I remember feeling that way even though I had the experience. I really recommend this book. I mean, what does it say about it? It says it's hilarious. I didn't find it hilarious. I found it wonderful, but not hilarious. About making the most of what you've got. Sharp and funny by turns, this is an exceptionally tender look at young motherhood and love that also involves professional wrestling. And yes, OnlyFans. I gobbled it up. And Emma Straub, from the New York Times best-selling author of This Time Tomorrow. So if you've read that, she loved it. Someone else said it's a thrilling, uproarious, and above all, affirming exploration of one young woman's fight to make it in a world that's rooting against her. Yes, that's what I got out of it. Margo is unforgettable. Yes, I heard they're making a Netflix series about this. Don't know how I feel about that, but you'd have to get it just right, I think. They always talk about that it's a laugh out funny book, and I didn't laugh out, maybe because I am of a different generation. But I also found, it's about adulting, and it is a feel good story, and it does end well. I don't think that I'd be spoiling it by saying that it's a happily ever after book in a lot of ways, but that didn't bother me because, like I said, it's done so well. And again, funny, but this is true. It's completely unpredictable by a writer so singular that it's hard to compare her to anyone else. I found that to be true. So Kevin Wilson wrote that. He's the author of New York Times best-selling author of Nothing to See Here. So if you read that book, you might like this book. So, okay, so why am I not a prize list person all of a sudden? Why didn't I? And I also read Brooklyn by Colin Toibin. I think that's his name, Toibin. and that was on the list too, of the lithub best of 2024, and I love that book as well. But I just found in reading these Pride List books that the authors had to go to such lengths to make it a prize-winning book. They had to almost like twists and turns, and you know, what happened to all the books that were just simple stories that we just loved? Maybe like Brooklyn, yeah, like Brooklyn. But it just seemed that to get a prize-winning book, you had to be extraordinary, and that's so hard on an author, I feel. So I'm still not 100% on prize-winning lists or prize lists of books, but I really enjoyed that particular list because I was able to pick, okay, this is one book that I might like, so let me look into it, instead of just blindly going out and buying all the books on the list and saying just, you know, whatever happens, let the dice roll, or whatever they say. Let me know your thoughts about prize lists in the comments. I really would like to know what you think. This has been a tough week for me. I'm not feeling 100%, and reading has been a great way for me to get through all the other bad stuff in my life. If you're interested, I have a finger that keeps on, it's called a trigger finger, and it hurts every time it bends. So yeah, that's not fun, and not sleeping and having insomnia is not fun either. But that helped me. In fact, I read this book, and this is unusual for me. I read this book in one day, and it is over, well, it's not that big a book. It's over 300 pages, not even 300. Yeah, it's like 300 pages. If you want to know what Rufi Thorpe, she actually looks a lot like the girl on the cover, but I didn't notice this. She's pretty young, and she's the author of The Knockout Queen. I've never heard of that book. Finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award. Dear Fang with Love. I did hear about that book. And The Girls from Corona Del Mar, which was long listed for the International Dylan Thomas Prize again, and the Flaherty Duncan First Novel Prize. She's a native of California. And I think she likes wrestling because she's wearing a wrestling t-shirt. She knew a lot about wrestling, and she did know a lot about OnlyFans too, but I'm not holding that against her. I hope that you will like, subscribe, and comment on this video if you found it to be useful in any way. And hopefully, I'm a day late, by the way, of doing this video because I couldn't do it yesterday. But thank you so much for being here. And until my next video, I wish you all good health and fun and aloha.